Welcome to today's webinar on the topic, Is Collective Intelligence a Threat to Individuality? As the founder of several technology associations, including the Alberta Council of Technologies, I've had a front row seat to many of the advancements shaping our world today: fusion energy, cell therapy, artificial intelligence. And it's clear that while these innovations hold incredible promise, they often come with unintended consequences. Technology has brought us longer lifespans, improved communication, and new freedoms such as reproductive choice and expanded employment opportunities, particularly for women. But alongside these advances, we've encountered significant challenges: environmental degradation from plastics, climate change driven by the combustion engine, and privacy risks as they've been articulated associated with AI. Another challenge we didn't anticipate, and one I believe is critical, is the erosion of family time and the decline in the role of parenting. As we become more reliant on technology and collective intelligence, the constant connectivity and demands of work have left many families struggling to find quality time together, and the role of parents has shifted. This raises concerns about how emerging technologies are impacting our most fundamental human relationships. Today, we must ask ourselves, as we continue to embrace collective intelligence to solve global issues, do we risk losing individuality, family connections, and the personal freedoms that make us who we are? This is a discussion worth having, and I look forward to learning what our guests have to share. Each has been a regular contributor to the KEI network, so welcome Greg McGilvery, welcome Randall Adcock, and welcome Jeff Kramer. For starters, gentlemen, I'm going to share with you a picture that I thought embraces and summarizes what the newsletter and what I tried to just articulate, which is the concept of collective intelligence being one mind, arranged and organized and assembled through artificial intelligence, and representing a clash of public and private interests when all knowledge through AI is public, shared, collected, analyzed for shaping public policy. Is the individual devalued? Are we devalued? Are we going to be left behind? And I think that's the essence of the discussion we'll have today. So for starters, do you agree that the emergence of collective intelligence should be something we should be concerned about as a trade-off of our individuality for the sake of advancing public interests? Go ahead.
When I think of collective intelligence, I mean, our society, any society, has some form of collective intelligence, and that's, of course, displayed in our laws and societal rules and norms. But when we're talking about artificial intelligence, I think of the Star Trek universe, particularly the Next Generation, when they talked about the group, the Borg, which was an alien civilization that assimilated other cultures and basically created cybernetic organisms that were all connected and all basically took their marching orders from the hive mind. Now, in the Star Trek universe, the drones, if you will, were all kind of slow and didn't react quickly, and I don't think that's necessarily a realistic interpretation of what a hive mind would operate like. I think that's just the opposite would be true, where they would be able to take in the thoughts and experiences of the different members of the group and be able to react much quicker and with that experience react much more intelligently than they did in the story. Now, just to be clear, the Borg was a very successful organism. Their tagline was "Resistance is futile," because they were basically able to overtake almost every culture they encountered. But ultimately, Starfleet and the humans were able to use their individuality to destroy the Borg, which again, I don't think is particularly realistic. So the pros and cons, of course, the pros are that you can develop a society that's based on sharing goods and some form of equitable distribution of wealth. The cons, of course, are that individuality would essentially be wiped out, and I think that so much of what we value in our culture is based on individual characteristics and contributions.
Yeah, well, you've laid down a broad foundation of just parallels of what is collective intelligence and the preservation or the threat to individuality. Randall, do you want to weigh in here and share with us your perspective on what it is and whether or not it's something we should be concerned about?
Sure. This is an interesting area that I've only recently started to investigate. Having a background in the theory of epistemology from philosophy, systems theory, and cybernetic, I've only recently realized how collective intelligence has been around forever. In a sense, that is, there's work by E.O. Wilson a couple of decades ago talking about the social intelligence of insects. How do they keep an anthill going, or a beehive, for example, or termites? There is a collective intelligence there. And then I realize, well, schooling fish go into various patterns to defend against predators. So that's a collective intelligence. Flocking birds do murmuration when there's a predatory bird around, a raptor. Herding animals, sheep, goats, cows, whatever, the same thing. When the predator around, they go into collective intelligence. And then we start to look at the human, I should also add, hunting animals like pack of wolves have a collective intelligence when they are studying their prey. And then, of course, we probably had collective intelligence before we had language. You can see collective intelligence in our close relatives, the chimps and apes and so on. They actually share practices, a little bit of culture there in things that you eat and you don't eat because you mimic your parents, and it gets carried on generation after generation. So that has always been with us, and only recently have we been studying collective intelligence as a thing itself. But Perry, you raise a very important point that with access to the large language models such as Gemini and ChatGPT, there's going to be an exponential growth in the access to that shared knowledge base that is going to affect us collectively and our collective intelligence. There could be massive breakdowns of the traditional legacy institutions, education and governance. The economy of the information economy can be grossly affected. The danger in all this is that we can have groupthink. Where everyone thinks like, no one thinks much or at all. So you don't get the diversity of intelligence or ideas unless you actually have a diversity of sources. You got to have people thinking independently, be agile and innovative and progressive. Otherwise, the World Wide Web becomes its own echo chamber, just repeating back to us what we've been feeding into it. I just want to show one little graphic here to show you that there are, in fact, many different kinds of collective intelligence that are currently being studied. And there isn't a single paradigm or typology out there yet. I've actually used ChatGPT to generate this graph, but you can see that there's collective intelligence in a number of different forms. I also wanted to mention, I guess, or reiterate that two prominent problems or collective stupidity are the groupthink phenomenon and a mass hysteria. So the third one being what I mentioned last would be that echo chamber. A lack of diversity leads to a lack of progress. That's basically what I have to say on this subject.
Well, I think you've touched on a couple of very important points that we'll come back to. I mean, totalitarianism is, of course, an attempt to enforce a viewpoint shared or owned by the state that the citizens of that state are to adhere to. You're seeing in the US today a conflict between two sources, one wanting you to behave in one way and another to behave in another way. The richness of the tension created by those two viewpoints is really a reflection of how individuals, when they disagree, can try and come about through a resolution. And in democracy, that's an election. But with collective intelligence, you wonder if it's not going to look like a totalitarian state in its ultimate form. But regardless, Greg, you had experience in the building of collaboratives, a form of collecting information from individuals in order to arrive at some common perspective. Share with us your perspective on this topic.
Absolutely. That's what attracted me, Perry, to your newsletter and the opportunity to share some thoughts today, was this idea of common good versus individuality. And you'd kind of set those up, have advancing the common good at the expense of individuality. And what we've developed is something called a collaborative, which allows all members to show up 100% as who they are. They don't have to give up anything to show up, and they can participate without giving up who they are, whether they're an individual, a public, private, not-for-profit organization, an informal group of stakeholders, or a formal multi-stakeholder group. They can show up, and what binds them together is common purpose and shared values. And the values that we've tested through the half dozen collaboratives that we've started is being inclusive. We collaborate, but we're not 100% inclusive, and that's a hard thing to be when you don't know that there's others out there sharing the same common purpose. We're respectful when we show up, and we're lawful. Those three core values allow a collaborative to function. And defining by common purpose across a geography allows that organization to be effective. It's really what we've developed as an answer to the complexity we've created. So if you want to talk about collective intelligence, everything that's not of nature on this planet was an idea between the ears of a human being at some point in time. And we've created these complex systems that serve us very well, but it's very difficult for us to improve them because we have a vast array of stakeholders with differing views and opinions that are currently losing the ability to talk to one another respectfully, let alone. So we have these tough problems that are hard to solve. And I think this new form of organization can help harness that collective intelligence towards a better way.
So AI makes a similar argument. It says it has access to all individuals' information, all knowledge that is out in the environment, and it is very quickly able to synthesize that information to arrive, whether it be a piece of research or bypassing an election. It will make a decision on your behalf, which is what I call the public. And say, we now have a public perspective, which is a gathering of all those individual viewpoints. The individual exists, but maybe has been devalued when people say, okay, in the interests of the public or the interests of the state, I have to sacrifice some of my individuality in the interests of the public. Your model on a smaller scale, of course, or even an election on a smaller scale, of course. This says the globe, the 5 billion people that AI has information on in time, generative, can in fact generate a common perspective from drawing on all of that information. That scares some people. That really appears to be the ultimate objective of globalization. Okay.
Said it's us and only us that can make things better. So I'm still betting on the human being.
Okay, I'll argue with that because AI would say, no, you haven't solved cancer. You haven't solved the problem of climate change. With the information that with quantum computing and the speed with which and the amount of information that can be gathered in this, you have technology now saying it can do much, much better than what you can do even in your personal collectives. It will do better than your collaboratives because it has all knowledge.
Billion. And action, two different things. Shared action,
Yeah.
I think the AI is a tool that we can use, and AI should have proper guardrails so it
Ah,
use us
okay.
as a tool.
So now we get into the guardrails, the need to recognize that maybe we should be somewhat concerned. And you raised an important concept, and that is people recognizing that maybe there are some grounds for concern and grounds for having guardrails, because it's conceivable that when you gather all of that information, that AI concludes something that is not really in the individual's interest at all.
Barry, I'd like to address a question there that has come up recently in my investigation with ChatGPT, because as I've got now a full account, it is tracking our conversations and recording core ideas. So over the long haul, it narrows the scope of the range of conversation that I have with it. It will sort of tailor its answers based on previous conversations we've had. And it occurred to me then that becomes an echo chamber of its own self, and my ideas become more narrowly defined over time as I interact with ChatGPT. So they asked, how can I address this? And it said that basically I have to ask it for where we may be wrong. We have to prompt it to go beyond the conventional conversations that we've been having. In addition, I've taken output from ChatGPT and put it into Gemini, which is less empathetic, you know, and so I will kind of cross-reference the information I get. Now, I'd also like to address another issue. That is what Greg has been talking about is very much married to what I would call methodical intelligence. That is, when you're doing facilitation, there are methods that you stick to that have kind of intelligence of their own, such as a brainstorming or similar kinds of methods that you use in a group environment to bring the intelligence around the table and create synergy, emergent ideas that no individual might have contributed to. Well, on a grander scale, we have an emergent intelligence across the globe. There is a kind of intelligence that is emerging that we don't even know about, but it's embedded, it's implied logically in the patterns of our conversations worldwide. So it's an evolutionary process that is not intentionally guided. It has a life of its own. And that would be producing some very interesting results as well.
That the point that you're making is something that has been discussed openly, which is as artificial intelligence or generative artificial intelligence evolves with all of the information it has, there's a redundancy that begins, and it begins to what some call hallucinate. But maybe it isn't hallucinating at all. Maybe it's simply that human beings don't have the capacity to understand what it is that it is trying to share with us. But it takes a human being to make that judgment that I don't understand, therefore something's wrong. And like Trump, I'm never wrong. So the individual prevails. Jeff, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, well, I just want to talk to some of the strengths and weaknesses of the system, and this is one of the things that I'm a student of science fiction, and so I've got several science fiction examples that I'd like to bring in. So, one of the strengths of having a collective intelligence like this is that once you train somebody on how to do a task, then everybody in the system can know that task. So for instance, you train a robot how to wash the dishes without breaking them and this sort of thing, and put them away in their proper location. And essentially you've trained all robots to do that. And you can have that intelligence distributed, you know, around the world instantaneously. So that same program can run, it doesn't matter in Russia or in China or Canada. So that's kind of like in the movie The Matrix, where that's like in the movie The Matrix, where they needed to learn how to fly a helicopter instantaneously, and they were able to download that information and be able to do that. Taking that to the other side, though, where it becomes an issue is, do the AIs have the intelligence to understand? So for instance, one of the concerns with artificial intelligence is if you say, make me as many paper clips as you can, as inexpensively as possible, it might use up all the resources of the world to make up paper clips and destroy everything that gets in its way. The other extreme of the collective thing is if we have AIs that are designed to protect us and still allow us some individual freedom, we might end up with a situation like Isaac Asimov, or the take on his books that ended up in the movie I, Robot, where the robots essentially prevent us from harming ourselves and fully expressing our individuality. So, for instance, we might not be allowed to go skydiving because it's too dangerous for us.
Okay. But human beings or individuals see these risks, and as such, having input to the design and the development of the algorithms as contributing to the evolution of AI, you would think that we as individuals contributing to this progress would be putting these, you can call them guardrails, but what these guardrails are is there are guardrails to protect the human civilization. And so presumably, I have to presume that the ethic that guides the evolution of AI is one that preserves and maintains humanity. And that under no circumstances will anyone be developing algorithms that do the things that Asimov anticipated, because he anticipated them, or Disney, because any error or problem that emerges, we anticipate, and we put an algorithm or a guardrail in place to protect us.
So the question then becomes,
like
what is the level of protection, and are we going to be powerful enough to override the computers? So, for instance, like I'm thinking the situation like in WALL-E, where basically everything's provided for us and we don't have to do anything.
But what do we want to protect ourselves against? For example, collective intelligence would enable us to do some pretty profound things with cancer research on the research side. So let's give it credit that it can discover things that we can't discover, in which case we don't need to put money into universities or into our research sector. And it can also, through automation, replace jobs. Now, what is it we want to protect ourselves from, which is really testing our values? What is it that we really want to maintain as a civil society? Do we really care about work if AI can become the productive force? Do we really care about the human beings be the engines of discovery? This is what one of our members in our newsletter or in our network has been posing to me repeatedly is, whatever it is, I don't give a damn because I'm going to be out of here. But it almost has free reign, and it's testing us. What do we really value?
So let's take a look at that. We're as a race, humans are making great strides towards longevity. So if we posit that life is the greatest and most scarce thing in the universe, and we want to, especially intelligent life, want to maintain that, and we're able to live essentially as long as we don't die of an accident.
Right.
And then if the computer is set to maximize longevity and intelligence, then it will prevent us potentially from doing things like skydiving.
But it also has a guardrail that says the globe can only handle a certain number of people. Doesn't it have a guardrail in there?
Then we go off the planet. That's a relatively easy problem.
So it recommends that you better depopulate some way or another, because with everlasting life, there's a limit.
Well, but people talk about the limits of the earth. We haven't started living on the oceans. We haven't started living in the oceans. The earth, I've seen some estimates that suggest that the earth could handle a population of 1 trillion people.
Yeah, but you're not ignoring my point. Whether it be 1 trillion or a quadrillion, sooner or later, there seems to be limits. And AI or collective AI needs to be conscious of what those limits are, which means we as human beings have to ultimately decide what we value, which was the point of my newsletter, of the unintended consequences of birth control with women in the workforce and the erosion of the parenting. And I don't say that to be a misogynist, but to recognize that the unintended consequences of generative AI are probably things which we haven't even thought about yet.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
We don't, when emerging technologies, the first thing we think about is economics. we rarely think about the social consequences. And I've raised that on the board of Fusion Energy Canada. As excited as we are about the possibility of everlasting energy, what are the socioeconomic implications? And are we thinking about that now? As Einstein said, as it related to nuclear, we had to have a Hiroshima or a Nagasaki before we decided maybe we need some international controls. Well, that's rather late. That's like a former premier of Alberta telling me that when his ideology of privatization was extreme and we hit the bone, then we would stop. That's a little late. And how late is it before we start containing or controlling the emergence of collective intelligence with AI?
I think because it's like an arms race, it's going to be very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And
Well, they're trying. Europe is trying. Yogi pays very close attention to what's going on there, and I'm informed regularly. Greg, you've been silent through this discourse. Is there anything you want to add as we get nearer to wrap up?
I would just say that I'm betting on human beings as the best asset to make things better.
Or you're selfish?
Human beings can use tools like AI, generative AI, large language models to do it. I think 80% of humanity is lonely. 15% of us consume 85% of the world's resources. And there's ways of connecting that involving caring and sharing just a little bit more to build a world where everyone has enough. It's amazing to me that 3 billion people haven't seen a clean glass of water in their entire lives on this planet. And we can talk hypothetically on whether, I don't see a magic technology fixing our problems, with the exception of to say that humanity is the problem. I can see us being canceled by technology. But barring that, I think it's only us that can make things better, and ways of bringing people together to solve problems, pursue opportunities, to my mind, is the only way and the best way, and a way we can get to work on right now.
I had a very, very close high school friend that we used to debate this very subject. He was an engineer, and I would often ask him about his faith in engineering. And he said, technology will always solve mankind's problems. You have nothing to fear in technology. And I today reflected in the introduction on a number of things that have transpired, which were unintended. And my caution is, I think we need to be more aware of the social consequences of these technologies, which doesn't mean fear, but means we may have a misplaced faith in technology. And I've been on numerous boards advancing and promoting technology. But at the same time, the role that I've played is the socioeconomics need to be understood, these impacts on things that we value, like family, like community, like jobs. Is what we're discussing here not a critique of the concept, however, of globalization, where we and our supply chains became all interconnected? And during
Can I mention something as well, Terry?
Just a minute, Shirley. Didn't we see that during COVID, that the lack of redundancy or alternatives in our supply chains resulted in, when a break in the supply chain left us stranded, like a ship getting caught in the Suez, or a war in Ukraine, and what might happen to the exporting of oil, whether it be from Iran or from Russia. Individuality serves as a safeguard to the failure of globalization, call it collective intelligence. And I think my underlying message in my newsletter, my underlying takeaway from these discussions is we need to value individuality. We are in a competition, and we need to balance the two. Yes, there's going to be progress with the emergence of generative AI, and faith that Greg has in humanity I share. But we need to be conscious that we need to balance, and guardrails will be important. And we can't simply have faith in technology assuming that it's going to be all okay. Shirley, what do you want to add here?
Well, I just wanted to mention, as human beings, we're very specious. We cannot just exist alone. And if you think about the dinosaurs, they all disappeared. I know when I took environmental sciences, which was some time ago, they said that human beings will be just a little blimp on the timeline because we're so destructive as a species. So we can't just be thinking entirely of ourselves, just of human beings. We have to think not only of other people, but other species and how we're destroying them.
Well, it's a balance. I mean, if if we understand what management is balancing disparate forces. That's what democracy is the balancing and accepting that there will be these forces and we must be tolerant of them. Technology is a major force in our society. We need to do a reasonable job in managing it in our ultimate interest. Randall?
Yeah, if you extrapolate on this concept of intelligence and personal intelligence, collective intelligence, you'll see that evolution itself, biological, genetic evolution, has an intelligence of its own through the selection, mutation and selection, competition, etc. And you can see us in relation to our natural ecosystems as well as a kind of a collective intelligence. We add value from our environment, and the environment provides us with inputs. And so we are definitely part of, well, I suppose Lovelock would have called it the Gaia, the idea that the whole planet is a living system with an intelligence of its own. And I don't think that you see an actual break between the evolution, the personal intelligence, social collective intelligence, collaborative intelligence, and this broader ecosystem intelligence. There's a continuity underlying all of these different manifestations of intelligence.
Well, the ecosystem has inserted institutions into our structure to try and make sure that the systems remain in balance. At the rate of which technology is moving in our society, when you consider the world today versus 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, we are moving at a very rapid rate as a byproduct of the sharing of knowledge. And AI has emerged. It certainly isn't going to slow things down. With any likelihood, it'll speed things up even further. The institutions of the past are probably not the appropriate institutions for the future.
Absolutely.
And we must have institutions that recognize the balancing of individual interests and public. I'm reminded in this discussion between trying to find the right balance, the debate between quantum physics and Newtonian physics, and we've never really found a way to integrate the two, that when things get at a quantum level, Newtonian physics doesn't apply anymore. We've tried to, Einstein and others have tried to bring these two things together and have never been able to do it. I don't think we'll ever be able to bring together the public-private interest balance. I think it'll always be out of balance, and we need an institutional structure and a sensitivity of our society that there's going to be imbalances, and we need to do the very best we can, whether it be through elections or guardrails or collaboratives. We should, or education. We need to accept the fact that there will be disparities, but hopefully we as human beings are conscious of the fact that AI, let's not place our faith in it. It's simply another player, and we need to be able to contain it and make sure that it works in our human interests.
I think
Okay.
what you're
go ahead.
saying, Perry, is basically bringing more attention to what Greg is talking about with this collaborative intelligence. It needs to be deliberate and methodical intelligence among humans, augmented by AI at our bequest.
But
That is,
the thing we do not need, and I've dealt with this all week long, and it will show up in an editorial shortly, is when you are frustrated, when there is a disagreement, we as humanity should have as a guardrail, not violence. But what we are witnessing over and over again, and I think you made this point earlier, Jeff. We as a society, or surely we as a society or humans, seem to resort to violence in order to resolve the unresolvable and forget compromise. I'm seeing and frustrated with some of the discussions in the US right now where two parties do not seem to be willing to compromise. And one of them saying he is always right. Well, that is no foundation for compromise or for a civil society. Violence should be a symptom and an indication that someone is not abiding by the guardrail of civility. I like bringing the principle of moral agency into the discussion because it's one of the things we feel we're witnessing in the US right now is a question of whether or not there is moral agency or whether our systems have somehow taken on a self-preservation mission without regard to moral agency, so that lying is okay, and debt is okay, and as long as the party remains in power, all is okay. That the mission is self-preservation, with no moral agency whatsoever. Go ahead, Jeff.
So it's interesting that Dale brought up religion, because if you think about the concept of heaven, so I think most people's vision of heaven might be something along the lines of there's no strife and there's no conflict and this sort of thing. Well, ultimately, that means that all of the people living in heaven have had to submit their individual free will to follow the rules of God. And so it's kind of like the situation of the Borg, where you are essentially under an intelligence. Obviously, God would be the ultimate intelligence in this scenario. So it's an interesting parallel.
This discussion is very much about mankind's propensity to try and create a better world, utopian in the extreme, where individuals can thrive, where social structures exist or maybe aren't necessary. The image that gets generated in my mind, and I've shared this with you once before, is the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, Eve made a mistake. She took a bite out of the apple, which was presumably, as some have said, the search for knowledge, the search to know, the abandonment of faith, and the faith being placed in knowledge. And that we as mankind, or we as a civilization, have this faith that somehow knowledge will take us to utopia. And they were dismissed. Adam and Eve were dismissed from the Garden of Eden, presumably because of their appetite for knowledge and their abandonment of faith. When I read that story, or when I repeated it, I reflected on what did God have to say after they left the Garden of Eden in the pursuit of knowledge. I think he said, "You'll be back." And I think the message there is this pursuit that we have may not have a bad ending. It may have no ending. And our frustrations with the unintended consequences are numerous. And they could be as bad as nuclear war and the ending of civilization, or the release of some germ that eradicates mankind, or an unintended event like a meteorite doing us what happened to dinosaurs. But the concept of faith as it relates to technology and knowledge is very interesting. I'm not saying I have an answer, but I share that perspective with you because I think we all are in this world pursuing knowledge, sharing it with one another, in the belief that if we share this information, we can make things better. But I wonder just whether or not that pursuit is that there's another option: transcendence, faith. And I'm not talking about institutional religion. I'm talking about where we as individuals come to grips with our humility as human beings in the pursuit of knowledge, and just how much we can or can't contribute, and do our very best. Okay, I'm going to have to call it a day.